Hello, welcome to the Mad Batter channel. My name's Chris. If you find this video interesting and or useful, perhaps you'll consider giving it a like and possibly subscribing to the channel, which will be a great help. Many thanks. As I'm sure you're aware, a couple of weeks ago Skylum introduced their HDR plugin, or extension as they call it. I'm sure you will have seen other videos showing how it works. It's pretty simple to use, but I thought it might be useful to show a comparison of the resultant HDR image you get from Luminar Neo with those obtained from Lightroom Classic and Skylum's own Aurora HDR software. The images were all produced using the simple standard conversion. Of course, Lightroom Classic and Luminar Neo have no controls other than alignment of images and de-ghosting. Aurora HDR has a lot of controls you can use once the merge has been completed, but I've used the image without any such adjustments. I should also add that there is an additional issue with Aurora HDR. As you can see, I am using the latest version available, but this is now 3 years old. I am shooting with a Canon R5. Aurora will not recognise the RAW files, presumably because the camera came out after the last software update, and I assume this will be the same for other new cameras coming out in the last 3 years. So first I had to export the files as 16-bit TIFFs without adjustment before Aurora HDR would process them. I assume Aurora will never be updated now, as Skylum obviously intend the Luminar Neo HDR extension to replace it. So anyway, here are the results. This is the Lightroom Classic HDR conversion. This is the Aurora HDR conversion. And this is the Luminar Neo conversion. The first thing to say is that the Luminar Neo result has a slightly different angle of view. It's slightly more closed in. If you look at the top of the window, you can see further out in the Lightroom Classic and the Aurora HDR versions. The next thing to say is that both the Aurora version and the Lightroom Classic versions are pin sharp. If you look around the edges of the windows, the images have been aligned accurately. There was a bit of movement. Similarly with the Lightroom Classic. But if you look at the Luminar Neo version, you can see there's some sort of movement has come through in the alignment, and they're not exactly aligned, so it leads to blurry edges. I've done this twice and got the same result with the Luminar Neo extension, so I'll have to do some more research and try some other brackets with movement in them to confirm whether this is just a one-off or whether there is an issue with the Luminar Neo alignment algorithm. As to the actual conversions, I think that Luminar Neo probably does the best job. This is the Aurora version, and the colours are actually quite saturated, and there's still quite a very bright patch in the sky here. If we go to Lightroom, there's even more saturation and contrast in the window, and the sky is very bright in the middle. Whereas with the Luminar Neo it's a bit more muted, the colours are more natural, and I think the sky is better controlled. So in that sense, I think Luminar Neo does an excellent job. One of the criticisms of HDR images is that they're over the top, i.e. the contrast is too exaggerated and colours can shift or become oversaturated. So it makes sense when you do an HDR merge to consider whether you could combine it with one of the underlying bracketed images, normally the middle exposure, to see if you can tone that down a bit. That's what we'll try here. I'm going to use the Aurora HDR version of the merge because, as you'll recall, the Luminar Neo one was slightly fuzzy for some reason. So we'll go into the Edit tab. So this is the Aurora HDR merged, and then we'll add the middle exposure of the original bracket and increase the opacity to 100% and make it the bottom layer. So we have, this is the top layer, the merged image, and if we reduced down to 0 opacity, this is the underlying middle exposure. So now, of course, what we can do is reduce the opacity of the HDR merge to blend to taste. Another tip, if you think about it, HDR images are all about mapping the lightness and darkness, i.e. the luminosity. So one idea I think we could try was, with our HDR image on top, if we change the blend mode to luminosity, you might get a better image. And in fact, you can see this is the luminosity blend mode. If you go back to normal, everything's much more saturated and vivid all over the top. So I think it's worth trying the luminosity blend mode. It doesn't work in all cases, but it does a nice job here. And then, of course, we can tone it down to taste. In this case, just maybe a little reduction, and that's now a very nice image. So that's a trick worth considering when you're doing HDR merged images. I hope this was of use and you've found it informative. Many thanks for watching.